The oil sands pathways to net zero was launched today by the large oil sands companies. They make up about three or four of them. They make up about 95% of oil sands production. And it's basically their roadmap to get to net zero by 2050. So we're going to talk to Scott Crockatt, who's with the Business Council of Alberta, about that. So welcome to the interview, Scott.
Thanks, Markham. Happy to be here.
Well, look, why don't we just start with what is your organization's reaction to this?
Well, we're thrilled to see it, to be frank, and I think this is a huge day. I mean, as you said, more than 90%, so you might as well say effectively all of the major oil sands producers today, committing not just to net zero, but also providing a tangible pathway to get there. It's incredibly exciting. It involves not only the companies, but some partnership with government. And I think that it sort of puts a statement down that says, here's how we fit into the energy evolution. Here's how we fit into the low carbon future. And it invites other collaborators to come on board and say, how do you want to be a part of this? How do you governments or you other companies also want to get involved in this long-term, low carbon, eventually net zero future?
This is something that hasn't got a lot of attention, but I think will as time goes on. And that is that all of the work that they're going to do in building this carbon pipeline up from Fort McMurray down south, maybe over into Edmonton, hydrogen, on and on and on, will provide business opportunities for other companies and for other sectors. And so I expect that this will be a fairly big, like a magnet for investment for Alberta in the next 5 or 10 years.
You've touched on what I think is kind of the centerpiece or the crown jewel of this announcement, and that's an enormous investment and commitment to carbon capture utilization and storage. You know, I know that your viewers are very experienced with these kind of things, but basically what we're talking about is a large pipeline that stops carbon from being emitted in the air and instead puts it underground. And Alberta and Canada are already leaders in carbon capture, and this is talking about building a large pipeline from the oil sands area and connecting it to the rest of the network. Alberta has some of the best geology in the world, actually, to pump this carbon underground so that it won't be released into the atmosphere. And even in this statement that they released today, you know, it was large oil sands companies, but they, again, invited other companies on to say, hey, we think that this could really work for anybody who would rather be pumping their carbon underground than into the air. And I think that that will eventually be some of the commercial side of this as well, because the dollars and cents have to work out too.
And I think there's going to be an important knock-on effect here, because once the oil sands companies are organized and this is really up and running in the next year or two, all eyes are going to turn to the conventional side. And the conventional side of oil and gas, it's about 500,000-600,000 barrels a day in Canada, there's going to be a little pressure on them to get to net zero as well.
Well, I think that every oil and gas company, every energy company is feeling intense pressure, not just around carbon reduction, but all measures of ESG. And I think the really good ones are welcoming that and can look at an announcement like today, perhaps as a little bit of a challenge to them to see how they fit into it, but also as an opportunity as well. As I mentioned, if there's going to be a large carbon trunk line built, that means that others could be shipping their carbon down into the ground as well too.
And again, getting back to something I've mentioned in other interviews, and I'll again pump my March article in the Alberta Views magazine about the oil sands and the pivot to post-combustion, which is basically, you know, carbon fiber and asphalt and other, you know, making feedstock for manufacturing materials instead of making fuels in refineries. And I think, Scott, that again, this is one of those, didn't receive a lot of attention in the announcement, but medium to long term, not short term, medium to long term, this may be the future of oil and gas for Alberta.
Well, frankly, credit to you, Markham, as this is something you've been pointing out for some time, and it doesn't receive quite the amount of headlines that it maybe should. But you know, there's a long-term future for oil and gas in what some people are calling bitumen beyond combustion. You know, making carbon fiber and other items that we make out of carbon. These are important tools in the energy evolution, in low carbon vehicles and electric vehicles. Also, all the plastics that we make in the world come from petroleum products. And so I think one of the additional things that's really interesting about this, by setting up a legitimate pathway for, you know, the world's third largest deposit of oil to produce it at a net zero fashion, that also sets up the pathway to say, well, maybe this is the oil we'll be using 100 years from now to make carbon fiber that we're building electric powered airplanes out of, and that kind of thing. And that's really important, in my opinion, from a narrative perspective, because it shows the 50, 75, 100-year future of this resource for this country, this province.
I would agree 100%, Scott, and I've written extensively about this over the last 3 years, is the energy narrative in Alberta has needed to be refreshed. Let's be generous and say it needs to be a little updated, right? You know, let's drag it out of the 1980s. We're not defending the way things were anymore. We're looking, this really is a forward-looking vision. It's the vision that I've been hoping we would see for a long time. And I think that that's one of the aspects of this announcement that we really need to seize on and keep working at, is the narrative, the stories we tell, and that's how you change the way the industry in Alberta is perceived outside of the province and even outside of the country.
Well, I'm a communicator at heart, and I see the communications opportunity in this, which is that as effectively the only major oil producer on Earth that is moving credibly and seriously towards a net zero future, I think this should be a marketing advantage for us. I think we should be, as we progress down this pathway, taking this to the world and saying, Canada's producing the highest ESG oil and gas on Earth. And we have a credible pathway and we're working towards it for a net zero future. And so you should be preferring these products to others who aren't on that same pathway yet. I see a marketing campaign in the future.
Scott, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Markham.